get that going. So we should be solid there. Scoot zoom off to the side. Also share my screen real quick.
I have just a quick question.
Yeah, what's going on?
So whenever I use the full render view on Blender, does that actually look like what it will when you render it out?
It should. You just want to focus on that little, typically lit up screen, or that little lit up kind of area or window within Blender. It's what's in that area that you're going to see. So if you're in your camera mode and you see that's what is going to be rendered out. If it's kind of in a more sort of grayed out area, that content won't be rendered.
So I just had like a glass object and they just look black and gray, sort of. We can maybe just wait later. I might be going past what I actually know how to do.
No worries.
So.
Yeah, I mean, let me know about that, and we can definitely figure out maybe what didn't go right about that. So yeah, just circle back around with me.
Cool.
Cool. Yeah. So okay, we're recording obviously, and let me go ahead and also share my screen with all of you. Good, good. And again, this minor housekeeping items is going to expand out the Zoom menu so I can see everybody okay. And lastly, the chat. Cool. Oh, and Luke, as you're kind of going through your day and everything, it looks like Lily dropped you a comment in chat about rendering and everything like that. So Lily, I really appreciate that. And as always, this isn't just me teaching you. It's absolutely all about everyone teaching everyone and sharing ideas and information together. So thanks for doing that. I think it really sets a nice tone and is a great way to be just in general. So yeah, check that out. Cool. So we're in today, of course. We're going to obviously be in Blender. And what I want to do is talk about several key subjects. I want to talk about general concepts behind what is known as the box model. That gets into things like vertices, edges, and faces. I sort of briefly alluded to those last time in class. I want to talk about the edit mode within Blender. The edit mode is incredibly powerful and really unlocks a great deal of potential within the program itself. We're going to talk about how we can merge models and various objects together. We're going to talk about how we can fill in missing vertices and shapes. We're going to talk about extruding and insetting, and also applying multiple materials to our objects, which is also a great thing to be able to do. So I'm just going to scoot that off to the side so that I've got it out of the way. And of course, as always, we're going to want to fire up our old friend Blender. Cool. Default file should be good just to get us going with things. And let me just scroll a bit and switch something real fast. Right. Cool. So again, we've got our old friend, Mr. Cube, right here. He's a little bit boring, but honestly, there's a lot we can learn from this. And we're introducing new concepts. The simple nature of a cube can actually be a really great way to sort of explore and illuminate something. So we have our cube on screen. Our cube is a 3D model, of course, and this 3D model is comprised of multiple different elements. So what I want to do real quick is, and there's sort of two ways we can do this. I want to go to my editing mode, and the editing mode can be found in the upper left-hand corner of our main design window. There's a little drop-down menu. It'll probably say object mode by default, but edit mode will be found just a little bit underneath that. So edit mode is what we want. The other way that we can kind of quickly get to and from edit mode is by hitting the tab key. So if you hit tab, you'll go into edit mode. If you hit tab again, you will leave edit mode. And you'll also notice that there are some small changes that are made to our interface while we shift between the two, and we'll start to explore some of those features. But generally speaking, tab is kind of the easier way to go there. So when we go into edit mode, our object will appear slightly different than it did before. When we're outside of edit mode, it's just one solid piece. We sort of get a main outline for that object, and that's about it. When we go into edit mode, the highlight color is a little bit different. And if you pay attention to it, you'll notice that each individual edge has a small highlight to it. And each individual corner point also has a slight highlight to it as well. Edit mode allows us to manipulate basically everything within our object, whether it's a simple thing like a cube, or if it's a much more complex model. Edit mode allows us to get in and really do whatever we want. So this is huge. Within edit mode as well, a couple of things that we can explore, and your hotkeys for this should probably be 1, 2, and 3, if I'm not mistaken. If they're not, it's no big deal. But we have different modes that we can operate under within edit mode. These are the 3 icons right up here, sort of upper left-hand corner of your overall interface. And if you hover over them, it should give you a little tooltip for each. We have vertex select, we have edge select, and we have face select. Again, all 3 modes that, or all 3 sort of properties of a 3D object that we spoke about just a few moments ago. So what these will do is they'll select different elements of our object. So if we're on, let's say, vertex select mode, if we go in and click on one of the corner points, doesn't matter which, but any one of the corner points of our 3D object, that point should be highlighted. It should highlight sort of a really bright yellow or a white color to indicate that we have that vertex selected. If we hold down Shift, we can grab multiple points. And if we want to deselect it, we can just click off into the empty void outside of our shape. So I don't have every single hotkey memorized, and Blender has a lot of hotkeys. So the question came up yesterday. I can't remember if it was during class or if it was right after class. Someone asked like, "Hey, how do I deselect something?" And the comment that I gave was just like, "Oh, click off into the empty void, on the side of the screen." That's typically what I do. But I did go ahead and look up what that hotkey was, and if you just hit the A key twice, that should deselect whatever you have selected. So just AA should also deselect things. So hopefully that's helpful. So if we have a vertex point selected, and we were then maybe to switch to our move tool, we can do one of 2 things. We can either move our object along certain axes, like we've done in the past, or again, we can kind of free drag or free move our point. And obviously what that's going to do is it's going to manipulate that particular vertex point's position within our 3D model. So what was sort of a perfect cube now has this oblong side to it. And if I wanted to, I can sort of rotate around my object at various points and sort of manipulate the overall sort of physical characteristics of this cube. It does typically require me to sort of go around each side individually and kind of look at it from different angles. Because typically, since we're using a 2-dimensional screen to view this object, I'm really only going to be able to manipulate my object along 2 dimensions at any one time. So again, there is a decent amount of rotating and shifting around that you would have to do if you do plan on manipulating points. But besides that, we can see that it's a pretty easy process and pretty predictable in terms of how it would behave. We can select a vertex point, we can switch to our move tool, and of course we can then move that point around to then manipulate the object. Think about it like playing with Play-Doh or something like that. It's a physical object that is malleable in nature, and we can kind of squish things in or stretch things out. 3D objects within Blender and really all 3D modeling tools behave under those same principles. We did a little bit of that last time in class where we would, scale things up or down or whatever else, or of course rotate them. But this gives us the ability to kind of stretch and skew out any point of an object. Imagine if we could do that in real life, right? If we could take like the corner of a table and just pull it out to kind of have that corner extend or push it in, or take the edge of a table and stretch it out so it's magically longer. That's basically what we have the capability of doing here. And this is useful because when we're 3D modeling things, the models that we create are always going to be sort of compositions or groups of objects, groups of more simple objects that when combined together create the complex shapes and models that we're trying to achieve. We've already discovered that to an extent, even though our projects have been somewhat abstract and fairly simple. We know, of course, that when we add multiple things together, we get a greater sum as a whole. The problem that we've dealt with so far is, since we've really just been working with primitives, it's been like playing with building blocks, like little kids building blocks that, yes, we can craft some okay things, but they've been sort of limited. Well, now that we know how to manipulate our objects, we can essentially create any shape or any building material that we need to. So if we need something that's like a little wedge, or a little kind of pie-shaped thing or whatever else, we could do that. We can start with a primitive shape, mold it into the new shape that we want it to be, and then apply that and add that to the model that we're trying to create. So it's, again, really powerful stuff. So again, vertex mode allows us to manipulate individual points. A cube is relatively simple, right? We have 8 vertices around the cube, so not too complicated. You don't necessarily need to do this next step with me. I'm going to switch back into my object mode by hitting tab. I'm going to go up to add, and then mesh again, and I'm going to add a UV sphere. Of course, we've previously worked with spheres and we understand how they work. But if I were to take that sphere and go into editing mode, or specifically vertex editing mode for it, you'll see that the sphere is a much more complicated object, with many more vertices than a cube would have, and thus the number of points and the number of areas that I can stretch out and manipulate around that cube are much, or sphere, are much greater. So every one of those little black dots within this particular model is a vertex point that I can click on and stretch and manipulate. So again, the detail varies greatly, but depending on what kind of object you're using. But just know that they all basically have these points. Another thing to note in terms of the detail of an object, this is something that somebody asked at the end of class on Thursday of last week, but just something that's going to be worth sort of everybody knowing moving forward, is how we can either increase or decrease the simplicity of some of our primitive objects. So what I'm going to do real fast is switch back into the object mode. I'm going to delete that sphere. I'm going to go back in real fast and just begin to add it again. I'm not going to start modifying things yet, but I'm going to go back up to add mesh sphere, throw that sphere into my project. Before I do anything with that, or maybe let's say, oh, not that, sorry. Let's add it again. Actually, what I'll do first, I'm going to scoot this cube off to the side. Add mesh, and then UV sphere. Before I do anything to this sphere, when it's just initially plopped into my my environment, I should have this little menu found down in the lower left-hand corner of my screen. Sort of looks like this. It'll be collapsed by default. And again, right now for me, it says Add UV Sphere. If I click on that little arrow to expand that menu, it's going to allow me to customize some of the initial properties of this sphere that I've just placed into my project. Specifically, what it allows me to do is modify things like the number of segments that exist around my object. So for instance, I could take that and drastically reduce the number of segments within it. Instead of 32, maybe this sphere only has 7 sort of, I guess those are longitudinal segments, if you will, right? Like longitudinal is that way, yeah. I think it's been a long time. And then rings are basically your I guess your latitude lines would be a good way of putting it. If anyone's more knowledgeable on geography than me, and if I just switch those around, please let me know. But you can see here, if I change my segments and my rings down to maybe 8 and 8, I get a much more simplified circle or sphere as my model than I would before. I can also do things like, modify the radius to make this generally a bigger or a smaller sphere. As I'm placing this object, I can manually set the position of it or its rotation if I wanted to. But again, oh yeah, do you have a question? Go ahead.
Just, are you able to change these things like after you've added it initially, or is it only when you're first adding it?
basically when you're first throwing it in, I believe, let's see, so we jump back into the sphere's properties. We got scale and everything like that. I've always done it right at the beginning. There's probably a little hidden way to do that. But I've always done it just right off the bat. So I'll poke around and I'll see if there's a way to do it after the fact. And as we can see, once we shift this down to a more simplified sphere, I have, of course, less vertices, edges, and faces as well. So if I were to shift back into edit mode for that object, yes, they're all still there, but I can kind of click on one. I can move it if I wanted to. And again, there's just sort of less that I have to deal with as a whole. I can still manipulate this object. It's just much more simple in its overall design. So that could be useful for a lot of folks. Low poly design is certainly a style of 3D modeling that's pretty popular. And really what that involves is just taking, typically complex or really detailed three-dimensional shapes and simplifying them down in terms of the number of faces and details that it has to still create something that looks the way it's supposed to, but with a lot less detail. And the aesthetic behind that is also really quite nice. So yeah, just things to think about. I'm going to delete this cube. Again, I'm just going to switch back into object mode before I do that, hit delete. And now I'm going to kind of focus in on my kind of dilapidated cube at this point in time, but nonetheless, I can still model it. Now that I have my cube selected again, I'm going to hit tab to enter edit mode for this. And I'm just going to tinker around with those other two settings real quick. So we just talked about vertex editing. The next one over is edge selection, and it basically behaves the same way. Edge selection is going to allow you to select a specific line or edge of your 3D model, whether again it's simple like a cube or complex like a sphere. And so when you have an edge selected, you can switch back to your move tool. And just like with the vertex tool, you can kind of pull that edge out or squish it in, or manipulate your object in ways that we previously haven't been able to do. And so again, pretty easy. It's just about going slow, getting the right view of your object, and adjusting it accordingly. And I'm typically just using the arrows to make sure that I'm moving my object directly along one axis, as opposed to just kind of the loose, kind of free-form movement that you have if you just sort of click and drag in that center dot. But again, pretty easy to do.
It looks like you're making the Denver Art Museum right now.
It does look like that. What I thought it looked like, and again, I didn't have a plan for this. What I thought it looked like when I was stretching this out, it kind of looks like one of those Jawa sand crawlers from Star Wars or something like that. But yeah, it totally has that Daniel Libeskind Denver Art Museum vibe to it also. So it's pretty, it's cool. And again, that's the beauty of this, right? Like you can be really precise, and you can model things that are very straight and angular, and like everything's at like this perfect 90-degree angle, or you can get kind of weird with things and just sort of go with the flow. So always fun stuff to think about. And then the last selection mode is face selection mode, which is going to allow you to select one solid surface and kind of push and pull that back in as well. It works basically the same way. It's just, it allows you to move that face differently. And again, my object is fairly abstract. If I were to add just another just straightforward and generic cube by default, some of the value that we can get from face editing is here as well. So like, for instance, if I wanted to create a rectangular shape as opposed to like a perfectly proportioned cube, I could go into my edit mode for this new object. We'll select it first and then go into edit mode, go to move, and then just kind of pull out one of those sides intentionally. We've done this in the past with scaling, but in this case, we could do it to actually manipulate the overall dimensions of the object. So it's kind of different. Like, rather than just saying, hey, it's a cube, but now it's like 200% wider, we could basically create a new shape. We could say like, actually, yeah, it was originally based on a cube, but actually it's this new form that's just squished down a little bit and stretched out, and that's what we have, right? So again, really useful to be able to do that. And again, we can create new shapes out of this as well, right? Like if we've spent our time in the primitive objects, you know, we don't have everything that we may expect. Like we have some triangular shapes, but not really too much. You know, I can go in here. I could switch to I can switch maybe to my my edge selection tool. Kind of grab maybe this edge right here on the object. And then I can go into my move tool with that and kind of just take it and lay it as flat as I can, right? Maybe just kind of manipulate that as best as possible. And now I can create kind of like this triangular wedge shape, which would have been something that I couldn't create a little bit earlier, right? And all I did again was, you know, from the cube, or, you know, as close to the cube as I can get it again, you know, from that general cube shape, I just took that top edge, stretched it out, and brought it down to essentially create this wedge shape that I want to deal with. Now, when I'm doing that, I mean, it looks pretty good. It looks pretty straight along that bottom edge. But what I'm gonna want to do here is in the move properties for this shape, I'm just gonna go in. You can see that there's an X, Y, and a Z property. If I go up and down, we can see that that Z property is increasing, or that Z property is decreasing again. And again, it looks like it's generally straight. It's not quite. And we can see if I look at that Z value, I'm like 0.01 meters off from it being fully level. So I'm just going to take that, maybe just hit it at 0, and that should level me out completely with what the shape was originally. So pretty easy to work with. One additional little issue that I have now, and something that'll come up throughout our semester, is technically speaking, you know, even though this thing looks like a triangular wedge, it still has 4 sides, and it has, I guess, what, 8, 12 edges? I think that's right. It looks like a triangular wedge, but it still has all of the kind of geometric properties of a cube, just based on how I took that one edge and stretched it down. And we can see that if I look at this object from the bottom, we can still see that extra edge, which was the original bottom of the cube, right? So I have what's basically called extra geometry within this model, and there's no reason for it to be there. You know, if I truly wanted this triangular wedge shape, this extra line right here is pointless. I mean, yes, I can click on it, and, you know, yes, I can continue to bend it and move it and do whatever I want. And if I wanted this to be the shape, sure, like I'd leave that in there. Or if I wanted to move it over, you know, I could do that too. Like I can create, you know, kind of whatever I want to here. And having that extra geometry might be helpful sometimes, but again, just in the attempt to create a wedge, there's no point in having that extra geometry. So with that, I have that edge selected. You can see it's highlighted right there. What I'm going to do is I'm going to hit delete. And again, this is in my edit mode. If I'm in my object mode, the mode that we were in, you know, up until basically just before class started, if I hit delete while an object is selected, the whole object goes away. But if I'm in edit mode and I have a particular vertex or face or edge selected, as you would imagine, we have the ability to delete just those vertices, just those edges, or just those faces, and leave the rest of the model alone. So again, in this case, I want to get rid of that selected edge. So I'm going to hit delete. I'm going to go to edges, and that should, didn't give me my bottom like I wanted, but we can fix that. It's no big deal. Let me think about that real quick. I think what we'd want to do instead, maybe not edges, maybe if I select those 2 vertices, just this little one right on the side there, and the vertice on the other side right there. If I delete both of those instead, is that what I want? Oh, that definitely didn't work. Okay, I've got another solution to it. So we'll just go back in, delete that edge. What we could do is we should be able to fill in that bottom spot. And this can happen. And again, usually we can get things to work again. Again, we got part of the way there. We now have just sort of one solid shape along the bottom as opposed to what we had earlier. If now I were to select maybe just the back edge and the front edge together, yeah. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to hit, I still have my edge tool selected, selecting that back edge, holding down shift, selecting the front edge right there. So I basically selected both sides of it. With both of those edges selected within my edit mode, I'm going to hit F on my keyboard. Now, if I hit F on my keyboard, what that's going to do is it's going to fill in the space in between those two edges with obviously another surface. So if again you're ever deleting something and like a whole chunk just went missing on you, typically you can kind of grab the edges around it and hit fill, and it should hopefully fill that content in. So again, pretty useful. And now again, we have a wedge. There's no extra geometry within this. And I could use this within my projects. And if I needed to duplicate it, of course, I could make additional copies of it, place these wedges wherever I need to. And again, I have a new shape that I didn't have before. It would probably also be useful for me to rename this shape so that it's not just called cube 001. You know, maybe we'll call it wedge 1 or something like that. That way it just makes a little bit more sense. I'm going to add another cube real quick. Maybe we'll tinker with filling a little bit more just to kind of practice with that. So again, I've hit tab. I've gone back into my object mode. Then I'm going to go back up to add at the top. I'm going to go back to cube. Just throw in a new cube real fast. And with that new cube, let's go into edit mode. So the cube is selected. I'm going to hit tab to jump back in. I have those modes that I had earlier. Let's kind of play with these different modes and deleting real quick. It's pretty self-explanatory, but it's useful to get a sense of. If I were to be on vertex selection mode, and if I were to select just a single corner, a single vertex, and hit delete, and then delete vertices, you can see what it does is it deletes that one corner, that one vertex point. But the problem is, lines or edges need a vertex to connect to, and faces need to be comprised of basically a self-contained series of edges. So when I delete a corner, I no longer have the edges, and if I no longer have the edges, I no longer have some of those faces. What I have in this case is basically just like a little hollow backdrop or something like that. And honestly, something like this could, be useful. Like if I wanted to do like a little, rendering of a room or something like that, I can zoom in on it. Now I basically have a floor and two walls, and so I could put stuff in this space and sort of create a mock scene that I could still zoom out of to see the rest of my environment. I guess this would sort of be like, like a room or a stage setup in a physical performance or like a sitcom or something like that, where obviously there's the home or there's the room or the space where the actors are performing, but as soon as you step out of that, you can see like the rest of the studio all around them. And this would sort of be like an example of that. So I guess there are some practical reasons why even just kind of a hollowed out cube would be useful. But that's basically what happens if I delete a single vertex point. If I delete two vertex points, maybe this one right here and this one right here. If I delete two of them, of course, it's going to delete both of those vertex points, the lines that connect them, and the faces that were connected. So now I really only have kind of this little shape left to work with. I could delete lines. I could do all that other stuff too. But let's see real quick. So what I'm going to do, let's switch over to my edge tool again. And I can create that same wedge out of this sort of semi-broken cube like I have here. I mean, I basically just have like an L or like the world's thinnest laptop or something like that. So what I could do, I'm switching back to my edge tool, and I'm going to select this vertical edge right here. And after I've selected that, I'm going to hold down Shift, and I'm going to select this bottom edge right here. Of course, two are selected now. And if I have those two edges selected, if I hit F to fill it, it's going to try to fill in the space, basically within the sort of angled area of this space. If I hit F, it fills in, of course. And it's not, of course, a cube anymore, but I have kind of this triangular shape based off of it. And of course, if I were to do the same thing on the other side, if I were just to, select this edge here, hold down Shift, click on this edge right there, and then hit F, I get the edge on the other side. And then lastly, if I were to click on this kind of bottom edge and this top edge and hit fill once more, it'll fill in sort of the slanted surface of my object. So click and click, hit F to pay respects. Now hit F to fill it in. And now I have kind of that wedge shape. And of course, now that all of that's good, if I wanted to kind of stretch this out, then once more, I could just click on this bottom edge right here, make sure I'm on my move tool, and then just pull that out to kind of create that object. So there's a lot of interesting ways that we can create content just by manipulating the various elements of it. Again, selecting edges, selecting faces, selecting vertice points, and so forth. If I went to face mode and clicked on one of these surfaces, I'm just clicking on this kind of this broad triangular face right in front of me right here. Again, I could go into delete if I wanted to. I could delete faces. And deleting the face, again, will delete that one surface. I now have this hollowed out wedge, and I could work within that area if I wanted. Maybe if I were creating sort of like a bedroom or something, or like a little area of an attic with a slanted room, now I have sort of that perfect space to go in there and begin adding smaller models to that area. So again, lots of fun stuff we can do by manipulating and modifying our objects, right? Go back to vertex mode. Maybe I'll select these two kind of points right at the end there. And so after I've selected, click off of that real quick. If I've selected just these bottom two vertice points, something else I could do that's maybe sort of interesting is if I hit S, S is for scale, I could take those 2 points and sort of move them. Might need to zoom in a little bit in a moment, but I can get these 2 points pretty close together next to each other. So not only is it like a wedge that's going down, but it's also pinning in. The thing about a lot of the hotkeys in Blender, like I said a moment ago, like I hit S after I selected those 2 vertex points and it scaled them. S is for scale, R is for rotation. You can do X, Y, or Z to move those points along any of those areas. So again, we have a large degree of control just by selecting things. So just know that that's all there. So, and it wasn't perfect. They're not like down to a pinpoint or anything. I might need to zoom in quite a ways just to get that just so. But again, I can go back and hit scale and use my mouse. It's gonna let me, how close is it gonna let me get? Decently. I could go in individually and move these points together so that they overlap like so. And again, I can create pointed elements as well. So these are all still very basic shapes, but just remember, these are the building blocks that allow us to create much more complicated things. I'm gonna build one more cube. So edit mode, add mesh cube. Scoot this one off to the side. And I'm gonna go back into edit mode for this new cube. I'm gonna do sort of the same thing I did a moment ago. For this cube, what I'm doing, again, edit mode, I'm in vertex selection mode. I could go to scale, and I could kind of pinch that down to try to create a pyramid shape as best as I can. While I'm in scale mode, technically what I could do is I don't just have to use the mouse. Using the mouse last time was sort of difficult. I had to zoom in quite a ways before it became a pinpoint. while I'm free scaling an object, if I hit 0, it should scale it down to 0 and take all of those points and have them coalesce together. So again, just to go through all the steps that I did there, I made a cube. I selected it. After I selected the cube, I hit tab so that I went into editing mode. Once I was in editing mode, I made sure that I was on vertex selection. And then I just made sure to kind of click and drag to highlight all of those vertices, right? I was sort of at a nice angle from up above so that, you know, I can see all 4 of those vertices were hit. But here's something that will certainly come up that is sort of problematic. What if my view isn't kind of at this nice upward angle where I can see all 4 of these points? Like if I can, easy, just click and drag and they're all there. But what if just, you know, I have to be, I'm trying to select all 4 of the top points, but I can't see them all for some reason. Like maybe there's another object on top of it, or maybe I just really need my camera to be in this angle. If I try to click and drag, and I know it kind of goes back at a little bit of an angle, so I'm intentionally selecting kind of this further down space so that I know my selection window should be at least covering the area where those back vertices are. If I select that, I can see, of course, that the top 2 were selected. But if I were to shift my mouse view up just to double check on those back vertices, they weren't selected. So if you have geometry in the way and you make a selection, it's not going to grab the things behind it. So for instance, if I shifted my cube this way and grabbed these 2 vertices here and here, like, you know, I'm making the selection decently wide to grab those 2, but it didn't grab any of the vertices on any of the objects behind me. So that could be useful. But let's say you want to grab the vertices behind your objects. There's another view that you can change kind of in the upper right-hand corner that allows you to kind of have better access to things. So we've talked about wireframe mode and, you know, shading mode and material mode and everything. This little icon up here, the little double square that says toggle X-ray, if you mouse over it, it still kind of shows you the shapes within your project. But again, they have a somewhat transparent look to them. Like you can see my cube now. I can see the vertices that are sort of hidden behind. So now what I could do, if I were to click and drag and select that area, you can see that even though technically there was a surface blocking it, it's semi-transparent. And when I click and drag in that X-ray mode, I am actually able to grab all of the vertices, even the ones sort of behind my natural field of view. So kind of a handy little tool to know about if you need. And I can click off of X-ray mode and my selection is still there. So that's definitely useful. And again, now if I wanted to kind of make that into a pyramid again, I can hit S to start scaling. And again, as I'm scaling this, if I don't want to try to do it by hand, I could just hit 0 on my keyboard, which is going to scale that down to 0%. Then I could just hit Enter to confirm that. So now I have a nice little pyramid. Looks pretty cool and everything like that. Certainly there are reasons why having pyramid-like shapes would be useful within your projects. But there's a small little flaw with this object still. Like you'd think like, okay, well, you know, it's a pyramid, it's one single point, so I can go in and click on that point, I'm gonna, you know, move it around, and all of a sudden, I'm sort of almost back to where I started. So when you take a bunch of points and collapse them down to one singular location, it may visually look like there's just one point there. But what I technically did was I took all 4 of those points and just kind of combined them all together in one location. And all of those points still technically exist. And I can't really imagine there being a useful reason for wanting to have a pyramid shape with 4 individually manipulated points at the top, right? Like, I just want a pyramid. I want this to be one point, not 4 points all in the same location. So what I could do is I could select them all. But again, I'm going to face that weird problem that I did a moment ago. even though we're at one teeny tiny little point in my 3D space, there are 4 points here, and those 4 points technically can block each other. So if I click and drag, I'm only going to drag the point that's closest to me, even by just like the most micro little millipoint possible. So if I were to click and drag to select all of them and then try to move it real quick, again, it only grabbed one of those points. So again, this would be another useful occasion where using the X-ray mode would help. I can toggle the X-ray mode. I can click and drag in this area, which is of course going to select it. But in this case, it should select all of them. And now if I were to move that point, you can see, well, those points, you can see when I move those points, they all go together, which means they're all selected. So I would say this is step one. But again, that's still really annoying. Like if I were to model this, if I were to leave it here and then come back to it in a couple of days, would I remember like, oh, just kidding, that 1 point is actually 4 points. So make sure you go to X-ray mode and make sure you select everything before you move it. Like it's a hassle, right? If I just want a freaking pyramid, what I could do is I can right click on that grouping of points that I had. And what I could do in there is go down towards the bottom and choose merge vertices at center. Now, what merge vertices at center does is if I had multiple vertice points, it'll merge them all together at the geometric center location of all 4 of those points. Technically, since all 4 of those points are already at the exact same location, it's just merging them together exactly where they are. So merge vertices at center. You probably won't notice any sort of visual change happening here because they were all technically in the same location. But what I'm going to do now is I'm going to switch off of X-ray mode. That way I'm just kind of in the solid mode again. And I'm going to do the same thing as before. I'm just going to either click and drag, or you know what, even just single click on the vertice. And as long as I've selected that, hopefully now singular merged vertex point, I should be able to shift back over to my move tool, click and drag, and that top point goes and behaves the way I want it to. No longer do I have sort of 4 points all in one location. I have one merged vertex point at the top of this geometric shape. I can stretch it out, I can squish it down, I can do whatever I want to with it, and it'll behave the way it's supposed to. So just remember that that's a thing. You know, you can absolutely merge vertex points together if they're kind of approximately in the same location as one another. You know, Blender will do the trick. Now, you don't need to follow along with this step necessarily, but I want to illustrate that same thing in one slightly different way that perhaps a few of you are already thinking about. So again, I'm going to switch back into my object mode, throw in one additional cube and kind of bring that one out real fast. I'll switch back into edit mode. I will switch to my X-ray mode and select that top grouping of 4 vertices. Now, last time what I did was I scaled them. I made them smaller. I tried to get them as close as possible, and then I merged them. But if you'll remember, when we merged them together, like when we right-clicked, chose Merge Vertices at Center, what Blender's doing there is it's figuring out the geometric center location between all 4 of these vertex points, which is, you know, like right here in the middle. I don't need to manually move them there first before I merge them. If I just have those 4 vertex points selected and I say merge vertices together at the center, it'll automatically coalesce them down to that center pyramid point and make them into one singular point. So again, pretty useful and definitely worth remembering. Any questions on that stuff so far? I feel like it's pretty straightforward, but again, even though we're dealing with kind of basic shapes and models, this gives us a ton of power behind what we do. So,
quick question.
What's up?
If you were to like go back from like your pyramid with the 4 vertices at the center, like if you kind of change your mind, decided you wanted to go back to like a cube, is there a way to like kind of snap it back to a cube to the 1-to-1 ratio, or is it just kind of like eyeballing it after
So let's tinker with that real quick. So if I had a cube, and I mean, it might be a little bit of eyeballing it, but if I had a cube and I selected those 4 vertex points, if I did the merge points to center, it's stuck like that kind of, because it is no longer 4 individual points, it is 1 point. And the only way you'd be able to get back from that would be to hit undo a whole bunch of times. Now, if I were to scale it instead, if like I did originally, if I were to say like S0 to make it a look like a point, but there's still 4 individual vertices at that location, I should be able to hit S1 again. Will that work? Let's see. So if I grab those points, I might need to be in transparency mode. If I grab those points, say S, well, no, it's not really working for me. I might be kind of stuck with that. Yeah, you might be right. It might be best at that point just to, hit undo, get back to it. And again, in this case, it was a fairly straightforward model. So like, even if I had to completely start from scratch, it wouldn't be a big deal. This brings up a good point though, where like maybe you've spent a couple of hours on a particular model and you're about to do something and you're not sure if you're going to like it or not. You're not sure if it's going to work the way you want it to. I mean, first of all, you should save your file. That way, if it all goes to hell, you can just close it and reopen it, and you're hopefully back to where the last time you saved was. Or what you can do is you can make a copy, a duplicate of that model, and just hide it. Just basically leave it in your scene collection over on the right-hand side, and just hide it. And then with the duplicate that you're about to try something with, you can try that technique out. And if it works, great. If it doesn't work, you delete the one that kind of failed, and then you go back to the duplicate you made just a few moments ago and just sort of start again from there. So there's a lot of ways that you can kind of try something without really having the risk of ruining your project. You just have to have a little bit of foresight and make sure that you've made that backup, you've saved your file. That way, if things go south, you have something you can revert back to. But yeah, we can merge objects together. Everything's cool there. Even though, again, we have this sort of a basic cube in front of us, I want to do something perhaps a little bit different. Sort of fun with this. What I'm going to do is I'm going to shift over to my face select tool real quick. And again, I'm just going to click on perhaps one of those faces on this object. This part's a lot of fun. So I have this top face selected. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to hit E. After I hit E, I'm going to basically drag up and down in my case. And you'll see what that does is it extrudes out basically an extra portion of that model. And so what I could do next is I can click on a different face surface, maybe this one down here, hit E again, and pull out, and I could basically extrude out that surface as well. So it's basically select the surface, extrude, go to a different surface, select it, E for extrude, pull that out, and you can see what we can do relatively quickly is build some interesting surfaces out of otherwise I mean, this was a cube a moment ago, and now it's almost like kind of like a rudimentary building or structure, right? Like, obviously, if you chose the Minecraft option from the other day, we had to go in and sort of painstakingly create different cubes and snap them together and sort of build our object out of individual geometry. Here, what we can do is we can still start with a cube or really any three-dimensional shape and extrude out that surface from the object if we want to. And again, that could be a lot of fun. Extrude that. Maybe go back to vertex mode here, snag those and scale them to 0. All right, so we can do some fun stuff. And again, all it is E for extrude when you're in the editing mode. Technically, you can extrude edges as well. So for instance, if I selected this edge right here and I hit E for that, I can extrude out just the edge. And then what I could do is I can lock it to like maybe just my x-axis right now if I wanted to create like, a little bit of an overhang there or something like that. And then from that edge, if I extruded it, I can lock it to maybe my Z and extrude it down like so. And so again, I could absolutely, create more sort of flat objects as well. If I really wanted to, I could grab these two faces on the bottom here, just by clicking on each of them, and then hit F to sort of fill in the gap that they create, if I wanted. But the extrude tool is huge, right? Again, I could revisit any of these sort of abstract shapes I made earlier. I need to go out of editing mode. I need to click on the new object and then back into editing mode. But if I were back in editing mode on this new object, I could click on one of its surfaces, hit E for extrude, and sort of pull that out as well, and do the same thing again, where I just kind of create extrusions off of my object. Other things I could do, let me get back to my kind of castle thingy that I'm making here. I guess it's a castle. But what I could do if I'm back in my objects, and I select a face, instead of hitting E for extrude, let's see here. It could be a little finicky in terms of how it behaves. Sometimes it's more useful to be in a forward view. But what I could do, if I hit, and you want to go slow on your mouse, but if I select a face and then hit I instead, it'll allow me to create an inset on that surface. And if you're having a difficult time using the mouse to get the inset to work, what you could do, let's confirm that real quick. What you can do, so I'm going to hit I, and I'm trying to drag it, and it kind of works a little bit, but then it stops. What I could do instead is I can hit S, let's see, like 0.5 or like 0.9 or something like that. So if I hit like 0.5, it'll create the inset at 50% of the way through my object. Or if I were to go back up to this face right here, hit I to begin the inset process, but then I hit S, maybe like 0.9. It'll create the inset at 90% of the way into the object instead. So just remember that the hotkeys really do give us a lot of control. I for inset, you can try to mouse it if you want to, but then S for scale, and then like some point value, 0.99, 0.1, 0.5 if you want it to be 50%. And it creates that inset for us. And then hit enter once you're done. Now, what does an inset do? Well, as you could probably tell, it creates additional surfaces for us within that one particular face that we were dealing with a moment ago. And these faces could be selected, right? I can click on any one of these one by one, and they could be manipulated. So maybe for one of these inset points, I select it, I hit E, and I can create an additional extrusion out of that. Maybe for another one of these, I select it, hit E, and I could push my extrusion in instead of pulling it out. So I can create little insets and divots and everything within my model that I haven't had the ability to do before. So it's just a matter of creating the inset and then just jumping back to your extrude to either have the object pull out or pull back in. Does that make sense? It's a lot of fun. I mean, it takes a little bit of practice like anything, but again, this gives us a lot of control over the surfaces of our objects. Well, there's some other fun we can have too. I'm going to select one of these surfaces that I haven't really manipulated yet. I'm going to right click and then choose subdivide. And that does pretty much exactly what you would expect it to. So I'm going to click on a surface. It's the only thing highlighted right now. Right click, subdivide. And you'll see what that does is it divides that surface out into smaller portions. If I really wanted to, I could right click one of those, subdivide again, and it'll divide it down. Right click one of those, right click, subdivide it again. And of course, each one of these subdivisions could be extruded, just by itself. I could select one of these faces, E for extrude, and pull that out, drop one in, do whatever I want to. And again, start to create really kind of funky geometry out of all of this. Now, in some cases, when I do an extrude, we can see that this particular area, I extruded things in, but then it kind of left this little overhang right here, which maybe is okay. But if I wanted to, I could just delete that. It's a face, so delete face. Did that not? If I hit the line, it'll behave itself a little bit better. Delete edges. There it goes. Oh, that got a little strange. What if I go in and fill that? All right, so that one might take a little bit of extra tinkering to fix and get it exactly right. But nonetheless, again, simply by subdividing our surfaces down and extruding or insetting, we can do a lot of interesting things. And again, I can inset one of these subdivisions too. I select it, hit I to inset. I can either do it with my mouse, or I can hit like S.3, maybe. Kind of get that really narrow in there. And then maybe like that. Undo. And if I wanted to, within my inset, again, those smaller portions could now be extruded however I may need. So they're fun things to play with. And again, all of this, it's starting to look kind of abstract in certain areas, but all of this literally started from just one cube. It was nothing but a cube that I pulled out some sides, subdivided some areas, created some insets, extruded, extruded, pulled things in and out. And we can see that relatively quickly, we got something completely different than the cube that we started with. And so again, like with most things, there's a lot of potential here, even though we only started off with a very simple object. So the key to remember with this is extruding is going to be super helpful. If we look around the space that we're in, whether it's your home or the classroom here, I can certainly tell that there are some elements that, if you had to model them in real life, they would probably be extruded. The classroom right now, and most of you have been in here for at least a little bit, the classroom has some windows over on the side. And yeah, they're like sort of metal bars, and obviously as that was constructed in real life, those metal bars were sort of put together and screwed in and maybe welded together and whatnot. But if I were to look at those windows, I would probably build those windows with an inset and then an extrude to kind of pull them in a little bit. And then I'd probably overlay like some transparent material on like a plane or something like that for the glass. The rooms that you're all in right now, I'm sure if you were to look around, there's probably objects and materials that are inset a little bit or pop out a little bit. And that would be the same thing. I guess another example in the classroom is there's sort of this this power strip that runs along the edge, and so you have a flat wall with something that juts out a little bit. And that could certainly be something that you can create with the extrude tool if you needed to. So again, lots of potential with it is the key, I suppose, to all of this. So the last thing I want to talk about in class today, as we are slowly getting towards the end, I'm going to switch out of edit mode. I'm still going to select one of my objects. It doesn't really matter which object it is that you're selecting, but I've got one of my objects selected. And I'm going to go into my materials tab again real quick. A little checkered ball down at the bottom. I'm going to add a new material. Default color doesn't really matter too much, just do something, But what I'm going to do next, after I add sort of a default material to this object, I'm going to go ahead and add additional materials to it as well. When we were dealing with simple three-dimensional shapes, it was fine if that whole shape was one material. But obviously, and again, it's very abstracted, but if this building, this structure, whatever it is, needed to have different materials on different sides, it's certainly useful for us to be able to do that. So within my materials tab, what I'm going to do is I'm going to hit the plus icon again to create a second material within this one object. So I add the new material, or I hit plus, and then I hit new to add a new material. And then what I'll do is I'll just choose, some different color real quick. Doesn't really matter what. So the big one is purple right now, but I also have a green saved in here. And then I'm going to go ahead and hit plus again, add a new material. So plus, and then new, and we'll throw in a different color, maybe a blue. I'll hit plus again, new, and maybe now we'll add like a yellowish tone. So got a couple of different colors in here. I know I didn't really think about like an aesthetically pleasing color palette or anything like that. I just kind of threw in easy things real fast. But as you can see, within my material panel for this model, I have 4 different materials selected. So what I want to do is I want to apply these materials to different surfaces. So now that I have a couple of materials kind of ready to go, I'm going to hit Tab, which is going to take me back into editing mode. And what I'm going to do is when I'm in editing mode for my object again, I'm going to make sure that I'm on face selection mode. And I'm just going to select maybe just one surface right now, just this one right here. And what I'm going to do, now that I have this one surface selected within editing mode, I'm going to choose a different material. Doesn't really matter which, but in this case, I'm choosing the blue material. And what I'm going to do next is just hit assign down beneath that. And what that should do is, I can't talk, what that should do is assign that material only to the surface that I had selected within my model. And so maybe I'll do the same thing right here. I'll select this surface, which is currently purple, of course. Then I'll go in, I'll choose that blue once more, and then choose assign. And so now that surface has the new material applied to it. Maybe the top of the tower. I'll hold down Shift, maybe select the whole top of that, choose a different material, and assign it. And we can see that the top of the tower now has different materials applied to it than the rest. So this becomes really, really useful again, where we're not just stuck with primitive objects with single colors and nothing else really going on. We can build much more complex shapes by manipulating those objects. And then we can also go through and apply materials to various surfaces of those objects as well, which gives us, again, a huge potential for what we can do. I'm not going to say you need to do this, but I'm sure if you were to go back through even the previous models you've built for homework assignments, this would give you a lot more flexibility in terms of how those objects appear. So that's sort of like one last thing that I want everyone to consider from today's lesson. Any questions on sort of the basics of applying multiple materials to a single object? Cool beans. Oh yeah, go ahead.
Is there a way to select more than one segment at once? Like
yes.
in Cinema 4D, you can hit UL and do like loop mode, which selects like the whole loop like around it. So it would select like everything around like one little area.
Oh, like a kind of a smart selection?
Yeah.
Yep. I mean, so what I typically do is just I hold down Shift to sort of grab things. You can also, hey, actually, would you mind just muting your microphone? Cool. I'm getting feedback. So you can hold down Select. You can also kind of Shift and click to kind of drag multiple points that way. Those tend to be the ways that I work with. I could look into see if there's like some kind of smart selection tool that grabs like a radius around what you've selected. Off the top of my head, I don't know what that is though.
Thank you.
Yeah. So for homework over the weekend, there is a design challenge, as will typically always be the case. Let me bring Canvas back up into the foreground here, sort of hiding behind Zoom. Cool. And some of you may have already snuck a peek at this. What I'd like everyone to do is create an orthographic, and I'll talk about orthographic in a minute, little mini town or village, but it'll be sort of like your own personal little town or village. And there's sort of two different approaches that you can take with this. You can either build your own personal little college town, or build your personal little high school town from wherever you grew up, if that's what you want to do. So you're going to build several different structures within this little mini town. And it doesn't need to be photorealistic. It can definitely be cartoony or caricaturized or anything like that. But this little mini town that you create, if it's the college town version of things, it should include the building that you live in, whether it's an apartment building or a house. It should include the building at CU that you feel like you spend the most time in. Now, maybe this semester isn't the best example, but we'll go back to early last semester. Like, what building on campus did you spend the most time in early last semester? This little mini town should include a building where one of your friends lives, and it should be a different building from where you live. Your favorite local store or business, as well as your favorite local hangout spot besides your house. So this little village will include 5 different buildings. Again, the detail could be much lower than that actual building, because of course actual buildings have, numerous details on things. I expect these to be sort of simplified down, and again, sort of like a cartoony caricature of what these buildings actually are. Yeah. No. Yeah, so they don't need to be at the actual location where they are. So like obviously if these are spread out around Boulder, I don't expect you to have like huge distances between them. What I almost imagine, and I have a couple of examples down below, is what I almost imagine is these are just like all clumped together. Like, what if your house was exactly next to the Atlas building and exactly next to your favorite bar and exactly next to your friend's house? Like, just one tiny little city block that has all 5 of these buildings on it. So these examples are kind of what I mean by sort of a little orthographic city view, if you will. And these are just a few examples from out in the wild. But they all have, again, that fun cartoony vibe to them. I think all of these are definitely within our realm of capability. So that's what I want us to do. If you don't do your own personal little college town, you should do your high school town. And it's basically the same objective. So it should include the house or building that you lived in back when you were in high school, your high school itself, a building where one of your friends from back home lived, one of your favorite local hangout spots, and one of your favorite stores from back in the day also. So your choice, either path A or path B, whichever one resonates with you more. And I'm also happy to be, flexible with things also. Like if you studied abroad recently, I'm also totally cool with you doing a little mini village from when you studied abroad, the buildings that you took classes in. I mean, if you studied on a boat, maybe that's a little tricky, but like let's say you like studied abroad for a semester in Europe, right? Like where you took your classes, where you lived, your favorite bistro or whatever, like, just kind of choose those 5 venues that kind of are similar to the ones that I have listed here. Simple, caricaturized, bright colors, cartoony. I would like everybody to include a 2-dimensional plane as the floor to this environment. And I haven't really done much of that in class so far, but a 2-dimensional plane is, of course, just another 3D object that you can add to your project under Mesh and Plane. And what you could do with your 2-dimensional plane is just, go in to Scale and just, bump that plane up so that you basically have a ground or a floor underneath your space. You may have already done this on some of your homework assignments, but if you haven't yet, that is one thing that I would like you to include. And of course, that can have a material on it. It could be like grass, or right now it kind of looks like snow. You don't need to worry about like roads and sidewalks and all sorts of complex scenery within that space. But, probably again, like maybe like a basic default sort of green material so that you have grass or something like that would certainly be useful. The other technical requirement that I asked for was that you have it set into an orthographic mode, which takes the perspective. So like in a normal perspective, as things move off into the distance, they appear to be smaller, right? So within Blender, the this little option right here, which says switch current view to perspective or orthographic mode. Just this little dude right there underneath the camera option. I want you to make sure that that is selected, which is going to give your scene, again, this orthographic view, which will make it so that when things get further off in the distance, they don't feel like they're actually, or they don't appear to be farther away. They're all sort of at that same depth level. And it gives it kind of like an old sort of retro video game vibe, and has this kind of an interesting aesthetic to it. The examples all have an orthographic view also. You can see that all the buildings are generally the same scale and proportion, even as they move further into the distance. So that's the last thing I want you to add in there. So hopefully this is a fun assignment. Obviously, there's a personal spin to it. You can definitely have a lot of fun and be quite creative with the buildings and structures that you craft. And again, I'd like this to be completed by the time that we visit again on Tuesday of next week. So if anyone has any questions, you're more than welcome to stick around. If you don't have questions, class is formally over. You can log off. You can leave the room. I did discover that last time in class, there is actually another course that meets in here after us. I guess they didn't meet in person during week 1, but they were here and ready to walk in when our class ended on Tuesday. So I do probably need to leave the room somewhat quickly, but again, I should have some time to chat with a few of you, especially since the passing periods are now 20 minutes instead of just 10 minutes. Actually, that's something I kind of like about all of this. So yeah, you can leave if you need to. Have a great weekend. Happy Labor Day weekend. And I'll see you next time. And again, stick around if you've got questions. And yeah, we're good. We're good.
I've got a quick question about the homework assignment.
Yeah.
So you want us to just use like cartoony colors for things? We don't want to like apply image materials onto it?
You certainly can, but obviously we haven't really delved into that yet. And material textures can be kind of weird in terms of like making sure that they fit the surface perfectly and making sure they don't like warp or stretch or look odd. You're absolutely welcome to use kind of photographic material textures if you want to. But I certainly expect for this assignment that you are still using kind of solid colors and things like that.
Gotcha. Thanks.
Yep. Any other Zoom questions? Alrighty, cool. Oh, hey, Luke, real quick, I'll get to you in just a split second. So just hang tough for a moment, and I'll be right back with you. What's up? Sorry, say that again?
Like find like Minecraft textures, like the blocks that take them apart and like the individual squares.
Yeah, so with a Minecraft texture, like the first thing you could do is just search for Minecraft texture, but sometimes you're just going to get like a single side of it. But obviously, like for grass, where it has green on the top, they have those. Let's see, I'm just going to do a search specifically for Minecraft grass. So try texture first, see what that gets us. So here, this looks like we could probably piece that together to do what we need it to. If you think about like a box, right? Like a box has exactly like that is an unfolded box. And so if you can imagine cutting the seams there, you get the sides, you'd fold up the bottom, and then you'd fold up those two side pieces and you'd get it. You can do texture wraps within Blender, and we will eventually get there. In the meantime, well, so you could Google Blender texture wrapping, or if you didn't want to do texture wrapping yet, what you could do with one of these images is chop it up into 6 individual files and then apply each of those textures. Exactly. So those would be the 2 wraps that I would explore right now on that. And yeah, definitely for grass more than anything. It's not even across all sides like in Minecraft. Other ones would be like a dirt is fine or like a concrete texture. But yeah, so that's what I would explore.
Cool, thank you.
Of course. And Luke, I'm back. What questions did you have?
Yeah, so I just wanted to quickly say sorry for being late to class last week in person.
It's all good.
Yeah. And then I was wondering if you got me on attendance for last week. And then I also wanted to ask about the design blog.
Okay.
That 3D design blog. I must have missed that one.
Okay.
So,
not a big deal. I mean, it's still early-ish, and I mean, we're literally only at the end of the second week of the semester, so not a problem at all. If you want to send me the address to your design blog, I can easily do that for you. I've got you marked now for Tuesday. If you snuck in a little bit late there, was it Tuesday or was it last week?
It was Tuesday. Yeah.
Okay, cool. I've got you marked for that now, so you're solid.
Cool. And then yeah, I'll just get on that design blog and send you an email.
Sounds great. Thank you so much.
Cool. Thank you.
Yep.
Have a good
Cheers. You too. Anyone else in Zoom have questions?
Do you have like 5 minutes to hang out afterwards so Emily and I could talk to you about something?
Yeah. What's interesting, I have no idea what the hell's going on with this other class. Like maybe they were just super early last time, but I mean, our class is clearly over. Their class starts in like 10, 15 minutes and there's no one here yet. So, because no one's here yet, I'm not in a rush. If I start to notice people coming in, I might just kind of like let you know, and I might have to pack up, go into the hallway and stop.
No worries.
I think we're good. Oh, and I could probably also stop sharing my screen now. If you guys have a question, hit me up. What's up?
Yeah.
So I was just kind of curious about like I said, we're going to be using like 3D animation and stuff like in our capstone. So I was kind of thinking about when we're going to start learning about like camera movement and like keyframing and things like that. Just because I kind of want to dive into it sooner than later. But...
Sure. We will get there. Maybe like 1 or 2 more class periods of just straight modeling will be sort of the first step. So if you can hang on, I guess, for another week or so, we'll start to hit animation for sure. I just want to make sure that we have interesting things that we can animate. I understand you're like, oh, teach me what I need to know. If there's ever a time though where I haven't gotten to something yet, there's absolutely nothing stopping you from jumping in a little bit early. And if you were just to jump into YouTube and do a search for, Blender camera animation, you'll find tutorials on that. And many of them are going to start off at sort of like an intro level where even if you haven't touched it in class yet, you'll know the Blender interface, obviously what your camera is, and you'll be able to get started with it pretty soon. So we will get there quickly, within the next week and a half or so of our class. But if that's still not good enough, then...
I was kind of expecting you to say like a month and a half. So
no, yeah. I mean, so the way the things are going to go is it's going to be like, okay, basic modeling, basic animation, and then back to like a little bit more advanced modeling, and then a little bit more advanced animation. Like it's gonna jump back and forth. Like our first animations are going to be like you said, like rotating a camera just around our scene to have like a nice little video, and then like some cubes moving in and everything like that. But then it's going to get into, or like maybe a little car driving through your little town. But then it's going to get into like, rigging and character animation where like an arm can move and stuff like that. So we'll touch on it a number of times throughout the semester, but the intro to it will happen relatively soon.
Perfect.
And cool. I didn't expect that we'll talk about this pretty much at all in class, but I'm wondering if you have any experience taking like Blender files into Unity and working between those two programs?
Yeah, I could definitely do some time on that. I mean, by default, as long as you save it as like an OBJ file, or I think Unity can even handle Blender files themselves, but like if you export your Blender content as just like an OBJ or something, you should be able to open those immediately in Unity without really any problems at all. And you can definitely send, whatever animation you create in Blender over to Unity, or call up a certain state of your animation when you want it to in Unity. So like a character might just have like an idle animation, but then you push like, a button on the keyboard, the walk animation happens or something like that. We could definitely talk about those things. That might be a tiny bit later in the semester, but we can definitely do that too.
Yeah, that would be really interesting. Thank you.
Cool. Of course. Thanks for the requests. Obviously, as a new class, like I have ideas in my mind that I think are useful, but obviously you have things that you require as well, and knowing that really helps. So it's been a couple of semesters since I've taught a brand new course, and so usually these are things that come up, no matter what the subject is. So I'm glad that you're mentioning these things right now.
Yeah.
Cool.
Organization is great, truly.
Sorry, you cut out a little bit there. What did you say?
I was just saying the organization of this new class it's on point.
It's really fun.
Thank you. I mean, secretly behind the scenes, I probably go into a little bit of panic mode every day before class. Like, shit, did I get everything I wanted to? Like I mean, it's like, it's like when you give a presentation in class too. Like, you want to make sure it's good, and you like you overthink things really, and like it's just, and that's where I am right now, and that's kind of where I am with every class I teach. Like the first time is always a lot of stress, a lot of overthinking. Second time's a little bit more calm and a little bit more figured out, and then by turn number 3 or course number 3, it's like it's autopilot. So I'm glad that you enjoy the organization thus far, and I'm glad that I don't appear to be freaking out. So with that, we're awesome. And actually, the next crew is about to jump in, so I got to throw the mask back on, and I got to catch y'all later. So see you then.
All right. Have a good one.
You too. When all my students left, I took the mask off, but obviously since you're here again, you know, it's kind of interesting. Actually, let me stop the Zoom real quick.